Welcome to Pocket Fiction by Steve Cook. Poisonroot, Chapter 1, Trip's Escape. Trip stumbled on through the night. Thick clouds covered the moon, but ahead, through the gloom, he could see his goal, the village of Monk's Retreat, still seeming so far away to his 12-year-old mind. He took a deep breath and pushed away his weariness, concentrating instead on heading towards the small settlement. An especially sharp gust of wind blew through him, and he shivered, hugging his habit closer to his thin body. Not for the first time he wished that the library had believed in warmer clothing. Or weapons. He closed his eyes for a moment against the stinging wind, and saw again the flames, soaring high into the sky, precious paper crinkling up and turning black. In the background, fists and feet connect hopelessly with bark, black with blood, and... With a gasp, Trip opened his eyes wide and pushed the memory back down in his mind. The town was closer now, the first houses only a minute's walk away. A few lights were on, dotted around the silent streets. Trip looked back over his shoulder. Nothing was there, just the darkness of the country road. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned back towards the town and trotted down to it. The nearest house had a small outside shed, and Trip took the final few metres at a dead run. He sank down, back against the wooden wall, nestled out of the wind's fury for just a minute, and took stock. Touching his fingers to his neck, he found the pendant, still secure on its leather thong. His hand went to his empty money pouch, which was tied onto his rope belt. Tightening his sandals, he looked quickly around. No one in sight. Trip closed his eyes and consulted his memory. He had once seen a map of Monk's Retreat, and the house he wanted was south of the town hall. He stuck his head round the corner, feeling the wind blasting at him, and checked his position. The clouds chose that moment to clear, and, in the sudden light from the full moon, Trip spotted the large building that could only be the town hall. He stood and prepared himself for one last push. In the end, it wasn't hard to work out which house he was looking for. It had a small sign outside, just readable in the moonlight. Victor Junn, it read. No visitors. He had arrived. Hopping over the low picket fence, Trip crept up to the front door and tried the handle. It was locked, of course. He knocked quietly, not wanting to disturb the stillness. No answer. He knocked a little louder. Nothing. With a quick glance back, he moved to one of the windows, their white frames grey in the darkness. The first one was locked, the second as well, but the third was slightly open. He put his fingers under the window and was about to lift when he saw something flicker in the reflection, heard something skittering on the cobbles. His breath caught in his throat, and he looked round. Nothing. Then a single leaf, whipped up by a gust of wind, rattled as it moved again. He turned back to the window, trying to calm the rising panic. The wood was old, paint flaking off on his fingers, but it opened. His heart pounded faster. This was wrong. Feeling like a thief, Trip lowered himself into the dark house. It was quiet and warm. Somewhere a clock was ticking. Trip stood quietly until he was sure there wasn't a single sound. Of alarm in the house. He started to move through the rooms, footsteps quiet on the rugs that covered the floor. The sitting room had a neatly laid table with several chairs on one side of the room. It opened directly onto a kitchenette with everything hung up on hooks. A sword rack took up part of one wall, two blades glinting in the darkness. Trip felt something bang against his shin, and he smothered a yelp. His heart fluttered against his ribs, and he was certain that it could be heard for miles. There were some stairs going up to the second floor, and, as he passed them, a floorboard creaked hideously. Long minutes passed before he worked up the courage to continue past. Under the stairs, however, there was a hidey-hole filled with 2 travelling cases and a crate, leaving just enough room for one thin boy to wedge himself in. He settled down onto the hard floor to wait, closing his eyes tightly. Shoulders aching from the constant feeling of being watched, he absent-mindedly picked at small fragments of loose skin around his nails. There was silence for a moment. And then a scratching sound made him snap open his eyes and bite back a gasp. Suddenly, the darkness was banished as a match was lit, destroying his night sight and briefly illuminating a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. The flame lit a huge cigar and then was waved out, leaving just the red circle of smouldering tobacco floating in the darkness. The sound of a sucking breath came, then another. "That it?" The voice sounded like a bag of gravel trying to speak. The man, Victor, it had to be, sucked on the cigar again and blew out a long stream of smoke. "I said, boy, is that it?" Tripp moistened his lips. The red cigar tip didn't move. "You break into my house. You don't take anything. You don't damage nothing. Then you hide under the stairs. Is that all you plan to do?" Tripp nodded, then remembered it was dark. "Yes, sir. Are you Victor?" "Maybe I am." "Victor Junn?" "Get to the point. You here to what? Laugh at the old man? Surprise him?" Tripp blinked. This wasn't going at all how he had imagined. "I'm here to hire you. I need your help." There was a long pause. The floor seemed to be getting less comfortable by the second, but Tripp suddenly realised he couldn't get up gracefully, wedged in as he was. The red tip burned orange for a moment, then dulled. "I'm retired. Get out." Something has been following me since last night. You deaf boy? Get out." The red tip rose as the man stood. "I have money. I'll pay you." Another pause. Then another match flared. This time it lit a small oil lamp which wicked into life and cast a warm glow around the room. The man blew out the match and sat back. He gave Tripp an appraising stare, casually adjusting the cuffs on his white shirt. Half his face still in shadow, his square jaw had a patchwork of small scars that ran all the way up to his close-cropped grey hair. He looked, Tripp thought, nothing like his pictures. "You're naught but a boy. Why are you here? Where are your parents?" Victor asked at last. "I'm from the Library of Leaves up on the mountain. Yesterday, the day before, I'm not sure, we were attacked. I think. They're all," Tripp said. Then suddenly he was finding it hard to talk past the lump in his throat. "They're all dead," he finished. Tears blurred his vision. Victor stubbed his cigar out onto a saucer on the table and stood up. He moved menacingly towards Tripp and suddenly thrust his hand forward. The boy barely had time to wince and close his eyes.